This is the fungus fairy, y'all. Fungus. A fungus. He's a fungi.
Yeah, so this is Andrew. He's my brother. He's an artist in New York. And he got interested in mushrooms. How long has it been, Andrew?
15 years.
Yeah, 15 years. He does walks with the New York Mycological Society where he's like a group lead. He's been interviewed on radio. Mycelial themes have worked its way into his own artwork. And he's been an inspiration for me for like really digging into the natural sciences as like a hobby as much as anything else. So that's our major kind of like connection point as friends.
The artwork is sick. Aiden, artist types. Well, artist. Check out his Instagram. It's awesome.
Oh yeah.
So, yeah.
Thanks, guys. Okay, so I was thinking of like what's a mushroom topic for arborists that's not like too specific that you don't need a ton of back information for, and I thought maybe we would just talk about the different types of lifestyles that fungi can have. So covering just kind of what is a fungus, and then also like what are the major groups of how they obtain nutrition. So what is a fungus? Really early on, people had no idea what a fungus was. And in general, especially in the Western world, they were believed to have kind of evil portents. So here's this Greek physician saying, the evil ferment of the earth, which men generally call by the name of fungus, 185 BC. And that continues on. In the United States, we're generally called a mycophobic culture. The British are infamously the least disposed towards fungi, and we inherited a lot of their cultural norms. Countries like Russia and China are much more favorable towards fungi. And I imagine that when you guys are doing site visits with people that they sometimes might express negativity towards fungi that they're seeing in their yard, suspicion of what they're up to, what they mean for the plants in their area. And then these three images are just kind of like a range of what a fungus can be. On the left, we have instant yeast that we, leaven bread with. A small parasite on a spider. That orange thing is a mushroom coming out of its body. And then on the right, Macroscoby titans, which is the largest mushroom in North America. It grows as far north as South Carolina. And what a fungus actually is, on the left we have kind of an early idea of what a tree of life would look like, drawn by Haeckel in the end of the 18th century. And they are as far apart from plants as they are from us. In fact, they're probably more closely related to us than they are to plants, even though they were grouped with plants until about the 1960s. But in general, it's an organism that has a cell wall made of chitin, which is the same type of substance that insects' exoskeletons are made out of. They absorb their nutrients through their cell walls, so they express enzymes into their substrate and then break it down into smaller bits that they can then digest inside of their cells. And then they're decomposers, parasites, symbionts, etc. So the general, extremely general life cycle of a mushroom, there are so many kinds of life cycles and so many kinds of fungi. But if we start with the mushroom, on the very edge of the gill is where the spores are produced. They drop. Oftentimes mushrooms can even modulate the humidity around the cap, which is kind of what the cap is for, and it will catch air currents and spread out, sometimes for really far distances. The spore lands, it germinates and forms a thread-like structure called a hypha. Those band together to form a new organism, which in aggregate you would call mycelium. It's the spider web-like substance that threads through soil and through wood. When it's getting the right environmental signals, that mycelium will start to knot together into a mycelial knot. That becomes a developing fruit body, and then it becomes a mushroom, and the whole thing starts over again. On the right, you can see this kind of extremely simplified artist rendition of mycelium underground, and how that mycelium is corded together to create a fruit body. So the three major divisions of macro fungi, of their lifestyles, are saprophytic, parasitic, and mycorrhizal. Saprophytic fungi are what decompose the wood. So if you're looking at someone's wood chips, it might start out like something in this image, and then when it's been colonized by mycelium, you'll see these spider web-like, they're microscopic, but when they are in aggregate, you'll see them as a kind of white mold. Anytime you're like looking through wood chips and it's being like lightly held together, that's mycelium. That, digests the lignin and the cellulose in the wood and makes it possible for things like worms to break it down further, and you get something like this soil. So, yeah.
Is it true that that the hyphae are generally microscopic? Like you're not going to see a single.
Yeah, a hypha is generally the width of a single cell. It's only when the hypha band together, which they do frequently, to create. I mean, we'll get into it a little bit more as we go through them, but because it's one big network, they have to create like freeways for certain things like water to move through, and those become visible to the eye as you get more and more braided together.
So then a rhizomorph would be like millions of hyphae.
Exactly.
Like fiber optic type stuff.
Yeah, and of course there are always exceptions. I'm sure that there's a fungus that has such large cells that you can see it with the naked eye, but for all of the images from now on of fungi, I was looking at just what the most commonly reported fungi are for the Raleigh-Durham area. So this one is the most commonly reported wood decay fungus. It's the turkey tail, looking very pretty on the left, but actually what it normally looks like on the right, which is just kind of a gross smear of fungus across a log. This one, Chlorophyllum molybdites, is in New York too, just the most common lawn mushroom. It's also the most, it's the most responsible for poisonings in North America of any other fungus because it looks pleasant, it grows in your lawn. It's decomposing things like the dead roots of grasses.
Does that have a common name?
I mean, it's maybe the green spored lepiota, or the vomiter, I've heard it called. Yeah.
That's what we want.
Yeah. It's not deadly. I mean, I think you could probably die if you ate a ton of them and didn't seek medical attention, but it just turns you inside out. It's a pretty easy, I mean, if you find a really large fairy ring, like a circle of mushrooms in someone's lawn, and they're really big mushrooms with gills, check to see if the gills turn a kind of greenish color, because the spores are green, which is a rare color for spores to be in the mushroom world. You might be able to see a kind of greenish tint to the gills on the right. And then stinkhorns, which are, I think as a property owner, maybe one of the few mushrooms that you might be concerned about growing because they smell so disgusting.
Can you review the Latin on?
So stinkhorns are in the family Falaceae, but both of these stinkhorns are in the genus Phallus. We have,
For us non-Latin speakers, what does that mean?
this would be Phallus ravenellii, Ravenel's stinkhorn, or Ravenel's phallus. Ravenel is a mycologist that named this after himself. And a lot of freaky stuff happening with the Victorians. And then we have the wrinkled stinkhorn on the right. And I mean, speaking of mycophobia in the Western world, Eddie Darwin, who is Charles Darwin's granddaughter, was so disgusted by these, by the stinkhorns that allegedly she would go out at the end of the day with a pointed stick and collect them all in a bag and then burn it in her fireplace. Parasitic fungi just breezing. I would like to have time to cover the mycorrhizals, but on the left we have the ringless honey mushroom, really, really common around here, and then chicken of the woods, which can both be a decomposer and a parasite. And then we have other kinds of parasitism. The one on the left is the lobster mushroom, which is actually a mushroom that parasitizes another mushroom. And then on the right we have a fungus parasitizing a spider. And then there are plants that parasitize mushrooms. We have ghost pipes on the left and the many-flowered ghost pipe on the right, which parasitize the mycorrhizal connection between milky caps and trees. Okay, mycorrhizal fungi. On the right is a pretty cool image of a pine sapling, 3 pine saplings, and then the roots are here. All of this stuff is the fungus that has partnered at these nodes with the 3 saplings. So if you can imagine the roots are pretty slow growing and they don't have a ton of surface area. The mushroom partnership, just like orders of magnitude, expands the ability to move quickly, to create surface area, and to draw specialized nutrients from the soil like phosphorus.
Are those just called mycorrhizal nodes, or do they have a cool name?
Well, here's an example. For instance, the way that it connects is called a Hartig net. We have two major types of mycorrhizae. This on the left is all of the mushrooms that we see has this kind of relationship where the hypha, the mycelium, comes in and it actually goes in between the cell walls of the root tip millions of times on a tree. I was just reading that something like a porcini requires about between 3 and 13 million connections with root tips to create a single fruit body. And then on the right we have arbuscular fungi, which 80 to 90% of all plants on Earth have an arbuscular connection, which means that they have fungi living inside of the cells of the root tip. The mushrooms that we're talking about only pair with things like woody trees, and they comprise like 2% of this category, but they're beautiful and spectacular. And and the ones on the right, the arbusculars, don't create fruit bodies that are visible, so you can almost exclusively see them with a microscope.
So if we were to see like a bolete in someone's yard, even a single bolete is going to be an expression of like intense
Just
fungal activity.
unfathomable energy happening under the soil. Millions and millions of connections and like unquantifiable amounts of chemical signaling between the mushroom and the tree.
So I could see someone with the reverse attitude of saying like, if I pick this mycorrhizal fungus in my yard to eat it, I'm actually harming the below ground fungus.
Right. Well, the fungus
Taking
is
so much energy.
it's not going back in no matter what. So the point of it is to express the spores. By the time a fungus becomes large enough that maybe you notice it, it potentially has dropped in between millions and billions of spores already. And they shotgun it. Like they don't produce one fruit body, they produce a lot. For any fruit body you find, there are hundreds that you're not finding. And they've done long-term studies on picking and if that affects yields over time, where they've done like 20-year studies on forest plots and shown that it doesn't affect. On the left, you have the hyphae wrapped around a root. On the right, you see hyphae inside the root. Just interesting images. Here's a really funny.
Could you show the image again?
Yeah. So this is, through a microscope, showing in the green, these are the spiderweb-like connections of the fungus wrapping around a root tip of a tree. And then on the right, an electron scanning microscope, this being the hypha, these are the cells of the root tip.
So it's not destroying those cells, it's somehow...
No, I mean, it's totally necessary for the plant to thrive. So
The one on the right is arbuscular.
exactly,
And
yeah.
those reproduce a different way.
They-
have a green body.
They reproduce through totally underground means. I know virtually nothing about them because I am not a scientist. But they don't produce mushrooms, so there's really nothing to see. I mean, in general, all of this stuff is like, we know so little about it. Like a lot of this information is only 20 years old. And arbuscular fungi, their function, the number of species there are of them, is something that will change a lot in all of our lifetimes. This is Wikipedia's rendering showing the thing that produces the mushroom, the mycelium, the tree, this connection. And it's showing that the mushroom is conferring water and mineral nutrients. The tree is conferring its benefit from photosynthesis, carbohydrates, meaning sugars. How a tree knows that one type of mycelium from a beneficial fungus is okay to enter its root cells and another one, which would be saprophytic, would be dangerous and it has to compartmentalize against, is not really understood. But they're probably expressing some type of chemical that is like a code, like a secret handshake that the tree is letting them in. And then the major groups of, if you find mushrooms like this, it is likely mycorrhizal. If people are complaining about something like this in their yard, you should tell them that they are lucky to participate in the grand dance of life. So the most common boletes that you guys have, incredibly, is this super bizarre shaggy stop bolete, which we don't have in New York, which I think is incredibly beautiful, always mycorrhizal, and then and edible. And the one on the right is the violet gray bitter bolete, which is not toxic, but is so bitter that you can't eat it. And amanita, which has some of the most deadly mushrooms in North America. The destroying angel on the left. They have a thing called a vulva on the base, which is part of this egg-like sac that can covers them in their very young stage. And then on the right, we have Caesar's amanita, which is a delicious edible, in which Sam has made me very jealous, sending me pictures of them growing like weeds in people's yards around here. Chanterelles, on the left, you have a red chanterelle, on the right, a yellow, always mycorrhizal. And then Rusula and Milky Caps, which I think are probably the most common mycorrhizal that you guys have. Sam and I were walking around yesterday, and there are just, hundreds of pounds in his neighborhood of these Milky Caps. Not of the blue one, but of a very peppery orange one. And that's it. Does anyone have any questions? Thoughts? Yeah.
So what's the network called again?
Mycelium.
The mycelium.
Yeah.
It strikes me that the mycelium is one of the first large language models, and that's how I picture like ChatGPT 3 or 4.
Yeah.
Like if you have knowledge of that, is that an accurate description, or is that, how would you describe that? Would you in your thoughts?
I mean, we can only kind of describe it in metaphor to other things. Like it's an image of it looks like an internet network, or it looks like a galaxy. How it functions is still being figured out. There's a lot of optimism or kind of speculation about how it helps forests survive. By say conferring nutrients from one tree that's doing really well to another one that maybe got shaded out and isn't getting enough nutrients. All of this stuff is kind of still being proven, but is very likely to be true. It is like how it even communicates. Is it through electrical signals? Is it through other kinds of chemical signals? Is being figured out. I think if you just imagine that like everywhere you are walking, there are thousands of miles of invisible chemical pathways that are connecting things, not just trees, but all plants. You're pretty close to what's actually happening. And the other thing I was going to say is that the division between something like mycorrhizal, which we overwhelmingly think of as positive, and saprobic and parasitism is way blurrier. Like there's not a mycorrhizal mushroom evolved from a saprophytic mushroom. They can go in between doing both. Sometimes a mycorrhizal relationship can actually be parasitic on the tree, even if it's only for like a few years before the relationship evens out and the tree starts getting enough in return for what it's giving to the fungus. Yeah. Anything else?
Can you say something briefly about the importance of each one of those lifestyles or life cycles to a given ecology?
Yeah. So with saprophytic fungi figured out how to break down lignin in trees, which is really hard to break down. If it weren't for fungi figuring out how to do that many millions of years ago, the wood would have just built up. Things like bacteria take way too long to break it down. They cycle the nutrients back into the soil. Sam and I saw there's a mushroom that grows exclusively on magnolia pods. It lives in the leaves of magnolia. And then when the pod drops on the ground, the mushroom begins to digest the pod, and those nutrients become available quicker for the tree again. So it's a quick cycling of nutrients that is hugely useful for the trees. And parasitism, you think of like the need for predators in ecology, for like wolves in Yellowstone, for instance. Traditionally, parasites would be taking out the weaker trees, making room in the forest for new trees to come up. And then mycorrhizal are providing a lot of stability for trees. Like if there's a drought, if there's a lot of rain, if it's having trouble getting nutrients, the fungus is like it's a nest egg that can kind of help it survive through difficult times, and also just help it flourish where like an established mycorrhizal network, say for like a large oak tree, is helping the new oak trees that are growing around it. So it's helping the oak, keep its dominance in a certain area, preventing, say, other types of trees from growing around it. Sometimes. Anyway, yeah.
Is there one thing about fungi, mushrooms, your world, your passion, that you know or you believe to be true that other folks are not quite sure of or think is odd or untrue?
I think there's a general belief that fungi are pretty deadly, toxic, whatever. There's no fungus that can poison you through touching it. You have to ingest a mushroom. And in general, they're safer to eat than plants. You know, there are not that many deadly fungi. And I think that an appreciation for fungi is, it's about looking really closely at very small things, which has benefited my life immensely. And it's a slower speed. They have weird personalities. They show up for a day and disappear, but they generally show up about the same time the next year. So you kind of develop relationships with them over time. I don't know, yeah, I mean, I think I wish that people cared more about them. I mean, we're also beginning to have fungi go extinct as tree species go extinct when they're obligate partners with each other. Anyway. Cool. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.